of the Press Club of Southwest Florida, and this is the club's new discussion forum that we're calling Roundtable. We hope that Roundtable will be a place where we can bring together club members, retired and veteran journalists, along with newsmakers from time to time to take a look at some of the timely topics of the day and the challenges facing the media of today. It makes sense that we start on day one here with the election and the fallout and what that all looks like going forward. And I'm very happy that four veteran journalists and good friends are joining me today to kind of kick this around. You know many of them. Phil Jones, veteran CBS correspondent, covered both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, is a specialist on what happens inside Congress, and I'm glad he understands it because I really don't. Denise LeClair Cobb, who, well, she's done everything. She's been a local anchor, a national anchor. She's owned stations. Denise was one of the first anchors Ted Turner hired to help him start CNN. Larry Doyle, good friend, longtime CBS veteran producer. This guy spent 44 years going around the globe, covering every hot spot for CBS, was a bureau chief, reporter, producer. We call him the legend, and I think that's deserved. And Gregg Ranshaw. Gregg Ranshaw knows a lot about inside Washington. He knows the swamp inside out. He spent 30 years covering news there, 21 years with the McNeil Lehrer News Hour as producer and manager. So welcome to all my pals, and let's have some fun. Phil, let's start with you. We're 5 weeks after the election, and it seems like just about nothing is settled, at least not for everybody. Where do you think we are?
You're right. Nothing is settled. This confusion is going to go on for weeks. And Donald Trump, if you're going to think you're going to hear a concession from him, I think you can forget it. The guy doesn't know how to concede anything. And he's really risking, in my view, the US Senate for the Republicans. He's making a fool of himself, and along with Rudy Giuliani, and it's going to backfire on him. And they probably will win one of the two seats. But that's going to virtually put the Senate in deadlock with the vice president, the new vice president, having the vote to break the tie. But it's a mess. I was there for many, many years, and the Senate I covered, the White House that I covered, people would fight like crazy for what they wanted to get through. But at some point during the day, they would say, okay, vote.
All right, we're going to unpack some of that. We'll unpack some of that as we go along. Denise, I don't think you're going to argue with much of what Phil said, are you?
No, I'm really not. And one thing that really has struck me is that, a real recent poll, half the Republicans believe Trump won the election. And that was just a very recent poll. And 68% said that they have concerns that it was rigged. It is incredible to me that after this much time, and that this feeling still prevails because of the president of the United States saying so. And will he hurt the Georgia runoff? I would totally agree with Phil on that. And I just don't understand why more Republicans haven't abandoned him.
Mr. Doyle.
Well, I think the question is Trumpism a cult or is it a movement? What kind of legs and momentum does this have going forward? A cult can be diminished when the leader of the cult becomes an idiot. But if it's a movement, this country is in real trouble. And the movement people say, look, overall, of 155 million or 156 million votes cast, Trump only lost the presidency by 42,000 votes. And that keeps them going because it's a true number. If you take the cumulative vote totals for Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona, and you add up Biden's margin of victory, it's about 42,000 votes. But it's, I think, 37 electoral college votes, which would put Biden at 269. So the Trumpists are going to keep pounding that drum, because when you look at that number that they can rely on, wow, only 42,000 votes made a difference. That'll keep a movement going over a cult movement, I think. So this guy is going to be around for a while.
The margin was basically flipped though the last time with Hillary. I mean, she didn't lose by a lot of votes in key states, but your point's well made. Gregg Ranshaw, where do you think we are 5 weeks later?
Well, it just seems to me, I guess I'm willing to commit myself to being an unabashed liberal. And after 30 years of McNeil Laird doing on the one hand, on the other hand, I finally can decide which hand I'm on. And I just can't understand how 70 million people can be so wrong, and that they've been willing to accept the lies and the corruption and the misbehavior, and in fact, even enjoy it, find that it's sort of an exciting thing in politics. And so I come out of this saying we still are a very divided country. And of course, the Senate is going to make all the difference in how well we can function. I mean, it seems to me that Biden can run do by executive privilege or undo by executive privilege many of the things that Trump has done, and I think that's a positive. On the other hand, Obama did that too, and so you see this continuation of the strengthening of the executive branch while Congress sits on its behind and doesn't do much.
So before we get to Georgia, what's the end game here for Trump? Denise, what do you think?
Well, I was talking to our congressman about that, and he's going to continue to do his rallies, I think, after he leaves the White House. But it was pointed out to me that he won't have the backdrop of Air Force One. He won't have the presidential seal on the podium. And maybe people will kind of drift away. I mean, he's bombastic. He thrives for the attention. And but what concerns me is what Larry said about that it's not really about Trump now, it's the movement. So that's my thought on that. And I'm rethinking.
But he has the money, and he may not have Air Force One, but he's got his own jet as it comes into the airport that says Trump. And that's what he wants. He wants to be a factor. And
well, he doesn't have as much money as everyone thinks.
But don't you think Trump's longevity is going to depend a lot on how the media treats him?
Totally.
Now, if he keeps getting exposure on Fox and OANN or whatever it is, and Newsmax, he'll be.
And CNN. CNN's been very, very guilty of that.
I think we've all worked in Washington long enough to know that there's nothing older than yesterday's news. And I think that I'm hoping that the mainstream media will turn its attention, as it should, to the new president, that Trump's outrageous behavior, no longer being president, is not as newsworthy as it was as a candidate and as a president. And all the insults and misbehavior and carrying on will no longer be man bites dog, and that will get on and perhaps go back to normal in terms of news coverage. He'll always be there.
What if he announces? What if he announces that he's going to run in 2024? Then what?
But it's still 4 years away. I mean, that's an awful long time to capture the mainstream media headlines.
But he'd have to be treated as a big player if he announces he's going to run again in 4 years. He gets access to the media, and that's all he cares about.
All right, let's talk more about that. So Denise says I think she said that CNN is guilty of overcovering Trump, if you will. What role do you think the media played in creating what Larry said was the culture, perhaps, of Trumpism? I mean, he is the greatest show on television for 4 years now.
Well, I think the big loser in this last election is the media. I don't know about you all, but I'm ashamed of it. Ashamed to say that I used to do that. And I don't know how we get past this, but it is serious, and it is too many people are out on the limb, and I don't know what CNN's going to do. Fox seems to me as though they're trying to play it both ways to get back in possibly with the Democrats and with Biden. But the press coverage has just been totally uncalled for, an embarrassment.
Gregg, how does the press wean itself off of Donald Trump? You said it's no longer going to be a man bites dog story, but if you're the manager of a broadcast, at what point do you say, I've had enough of this, we're not doing that anymore?
I've often said when I was the news editor at the NewsHour that anytime Trump said something that was an insult or that was a bald-faced lie, I would have recommended not covering it all. And I know that's an awful lot of pressure. And of course, that's easy to say in retirement when, you're not on the firing line.
But you know how this works. If one network carries it, then the bosses at the other networks, Larry knows this, we all know this, the other networks go, how come we didn't have that?
Yeah, but the bosses are going to have to toughen up, I think, and have a little moral fiber and not just be all profits and all competition all the time. I mean, it's time for people to have some guts.
It used to be called playing chicken at CBS with special reports. We'd be all geared up to get on the air, break into the network with a special report, but we wanted somebody else to go first. And I think that's going to be the same way with Trump. I mean, I don't think, it's like the old local TV adage, if it bleeds, it leads. This guy is always going to be a bleeder. He's always going to be out there doing something that is going to be amusing to the viewers. I mean, the two of the most used words in 2020 or phrases are these: rigged election and fake news. And fake news has now gone global, as you know. I think the real question for the media is how we dig ourselves out of that hole that we're viewed by half the nation as being fakers.
At the NewsHour,
I think one of the reasons why Fox and OAN and Newsmax have become so watched and listened to is because the mainstream media and CNN and MSNBC especially, they don't give him any credit. I mean, he's had a few accomplishments. When I talk to people about why they voted for Trump, I don't like him as a person, but I do like his policies. You've heard that. Everybody says that when they vote for Trump. But, he did pass, a bipartisan First Step Act to reform the criminal justice system. I mean, he did some things for the farmers. He increased energy exports to the EU. I mean, he did some things. And if you ask most people, they won't know that because nobody covered it. Or if they did, they said, well, it wasn't that great because it's Trump. And he does exaggerate it and he makes it sound much better than it was. Maybe a 200 billion when it was 100 billion, whatever it is. But I know that CNN and MSNBC are not giving him any credit, zero. And so it's the president, and people will turn to, if they voted for him, where they're going to tell them how good he is.
I liken the attitude of Trump supporters to people who hire a lawyer. And by God, if you were indicted for a crime and went on trial, you'd want the meanest junkyard lawyer you could find to get you out of the jam. And I think a lot of people see Trump as that junkyard lawyer, that junkyard defender who is going to bat for them, and no holds barred. He'll insult anybody and do anything he can to get his way, to get your way in terms of being the president of the United States. He doesn't need to have charm or class. He has to be aggressive and a fighter.
Let's talk about Trump supporters, because Greg, you've made some observations about that. The pollsters and the pundits were wrong as to who made up the Trump supporters. I mean, there were some counterintuitive things that happened. For example, older white men went away from Trump and they thought that was a lock. And yet Hispanics voted for Trump in big numbers. What did you see in Texas?
Well, in Texas, we had the same thing. I mean, especially down at the Rio Grande Valley. And I've been down to those, to McAllen and Brownsville, and even across the border to Matamoros. And when you think of the way Trump talked about Hispanic immigrants and the people who were on the Mexican side of the border and not letting them in and mistreating their children and mistreating them, I couldn't imagine a soul down there, even second, third generations, who would have voted for Trump. And yet, surprise, he did well, or better than Hillary, or Biden did worse than Hillary, is what I want to say, in those areas, because you have second and third generations who are saying, I've got mine, those people are nuisance. We don't need to worry about them. And by God, we want this economy to pick up and make our businesses, make our successful businesses run again and stay on top of things.
Larry, let's talk about Florida. You lived in Miami for a long time. And the fact is, Biden did very well in Miami-Dade.
What Greg just said is spot on. Take a look at the Cuban community over in Dade and Broward counties, right? It is a question of, we've got ours, and we're going to hold on to it, and we're going to vote for the guy who wants to and allows us to hold on to it. If the Democrats made a horrific choice, it's the way they courted Hispanic Latin voters. Hispanic Latin voters aren't just under one umbrella. You can't cover them with one blanket. The Cuban American community in Miami-Dade, Broward, et cetera, the Puerto Ricans in Florida, the Venezuelans in Florida, they all have different ideas. As Greg said, down around the border in Texas and New Mexico, they don't consider themselves with the same concerns as the Cuban Americans do in Florida. The Democrats made a terrible mistake when they looked at Hispanic Americans just under one blanket and one umbrella. They didn't select areas and go after those with specific ideas and policies. A horrible mistake.
The reality is that we're going to have another 4 years just like we had. We have the other side saying that the president is illegitimate, that it was rigged, and they're going to carry this theme on and on as they try to damage and get even with the Democrats.
Let's talk about Georgia. Phil, let me start with you. Give me some context, if you would, as to how important. I mean, I think some of us understand that this is pretty important, these two Senate races, but put it in some historical context for me.
Well, it's going to make all the difference in the world, because if they can keep control, the Republicans, they will be able to kill any legislation that they think is too liberal. But it's important. I think it's important for the country, and frankly, I think Joe Biden, wherever he is in the bunker or whatever, I think he's probably cheering the Republicans in this Senate race.
Explain to me why, though. Explain why might be the case.
It's the best thing that could happen in his having to deal with the progressives, the AOCs, and all of these people, Bernie Sanders. They're going to be coming and pushing him on their agenda, and he's going to be able to say, look, I can't do it. The Senate will never go for it. So you're wasting your time. And he can use the Senate as the bad guys.
Greg, you're shaking your head. You think that's right?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a very likely scenario, especially if he's getting a lot of pressure from the AOC progressive side of the party. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it would be better if Democrats controlled the Senate, because then I think you could have two houses of Congress become more active in passing legislation and passing a Biden program. But this is another way to deal with it.
Denise, what's your sense of what happened in Georgia? They won all the down ballot races, the Republicans. Trump lost narrowly. You worked there, you lived there for a while. I mean, how do you make sense of that?
Well, I think that there are certain counties in Georgia that you, right now, if you go to them, I don't remember the name of the county, but 86% voted for Trump. And they still have their signs up, and they're still, saying that he won, and that if it turns out that Biden goes into the White House, it was all rigged, and they'll believe that. And if you look at them, it's not, they're dressed well, they seem intelligent, and that to me is another dichotomy that is happening in parts of Georgia. And I saw this morning Newt Gingrich talking, and he's also flouting the whole it's rigged. And I was a politician there, so I know how that works, and I've never seen it this bad. So, they're hearing all of that.
So, Phil, let's just assume for a minute that on January 20, Joe Biden's going to take the oath of office, because I think that's probably going to happen. And let's say you're right that he wants the Republicans to maintain control of the Senate. How's he govern? How does he make anything happen in the Senate if that's the case?
Well, if the Republicans maintain,
Let's say the Republicans maintain control of the Senate. Your scenario.
well, I think Biden is the key to getting the nation past much of this chaos, and he is something. He's good right now. Obama, his entire 2 terms, he had no real friends in Congress. He wouldn't do anything with them to try to work out some deal. He did early on. They tried to do a budget thing, and that didn't work because the Republican leadership came back and said, we can't get our Republicans to go along with what you all have agreed to. But Biden is the kind of guy, he's a creature of the Senate. And he has lots of friends, including Mitch McConnell. And he's going to have a different relationship, and he can get things through that I think that will surprise everybody.
How good is the relationship?
That just, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, piggybacking on that, in 2010, didn't McConnell go around Reid right to Biden to get that passed, and it was passed. So maybe McConnell owes him one on that, but Politico I think is calling them the new power couple of DC. McConnell was the only Republican to go to Beau Biden's funeral. They've been friends, so it seems to me that it would be good for maybe the Republicans to have or a tie or something where McConnell and Biden have to work together.
I think they'll both be in.
You're muted.
Unmute, Greg. Unmute your mic.
Phil is citing the very thing in Biden's skill level that Kamala Harris nailed him for in the early debates. And now he's bringing that to the table in hopes that it'll make him a successful president.
How's that going to play, though, with the progressives? I mean, you started out by saying you were a proud liberal. If Biden does a coalition type government in the Senate with McConnell and he doesn't accomplish anything the progressives want him to do, where does that go?
Well, I'm a middle of the roader. I may say liberal, but I mean Democrat. I hate the conflict that goes on in Congress. I was thinking today in 1968, I was a grad student and went to what was called the Evan Charlie show. Everett Dirksen and Charlie Halleck had a news conference every Friday afternoon, and they were being pressed about something. And some guy said, well, to Dirksen, well, you and Lyndon run the country, don't you? And Dirksen was obsequious and chuckling and that sort of thing. But that's how it worked then. And that, to me, is how it should make some sense today.
That's the way Biden is going to approach this. One anecdote that I'm aware of with Biden, and I was really impressed. When the Republicans took control back of the Senate after 25 years in the woods, Jesse Helms became the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Biden had been the chairman. And Biden went to Helms and said, look, Jesse, I want to make a deal with you. I don't think you're at the twilight of your career in the Senate, and I don't think you want to leave being known as Senator No. And they shook hands, and Biden promised to not surprise him, told him I would expect you to go ahead and push for your conservative agenda, but let's not surprise each other. And they developed one heck of a relationship. Even to Helms's dying day. And that's what it takes to get things done there. It's a buddy thing. And as you mentioned, Kamala Harris, she really socked him during the debate on this. But that's what he's going to bring back, and the progressives might as well swallow it, because that's who Joe Biden is. And I think it'll make a huge difference.
So, hey, Larry, if Phil and Greg are right, and Biden manages to govern in the middle, what happens to the polar ends of the political spectrum? Well, the far lefties and the far right wing people.
Before I get to that, why would Mitch McConnell want to make any kind of deal with Joe Biden? I mean, the Republicans are going to control one leg of the government. If McConnell makes nice with Biden, doesn't he cede control of the government? And he has shown no signs of being a nice guy. And as long as Trump is still pulling McConnell's strings, I don't see him being a pal to the president-elect at all. I think just the opposite. He's going to dig in even deeper.
It's those Senate relationships that are much different, and it's hard to bring those friendships up.
Yeah, there are friendships, but there's also control over one portion of the government, and I think that control trumps, I hate to use that verb, trumps any need or desire to compromise or be accommodating.
Okay, we're going to be wrapping up here in a minute, but let's forget the political parties for a minute. America is in two places. We have extremes on both sides. Even if Biden puts together a governing coalition, can people come together in large enough numbers that we don't have a 50% population? What do you think, Larry?
Never.
Never?
Not going to happen. People on both sides are too entrenched. I mean, you know, the Trump people, they're not going to all of a sudden spout angel wings. It's not going to happen. They're dug in. Be it 35 to 40 to 45%. You're not changing those minds.
Okay, but what about at the other end of the spectrum, Greg? Is there any bend in the so-called progressives? How about the squad? Do you see the squad ever like lining up in the middle and saying, yeah, okay, we'll go along with some of that?
Well, I have hope for everybody that seeing that there's possibilities to compromise. I realize there was the old instruction, we're sending you to Washington to stand your ground, not compromise. I think that was a Tea Party or Freedom Forum, Freedom Caucus idea. I think people are going to have to come to terms with that and say, look, you're out here. We're going to try and do things here that you get a little bit and you get a little bit, but this is how the country has been run for a long time, and we're not going to the extremes.
Okay, so let's wrap it up here at the end. And Denise, why don't you take a crack at this? With all of the stuff that's happened in the fallout from the election, Trump's refusal to concede, the polarization of the electorate, do you think that there's any chance we can kind of restore any kind of public confidence in the institutions of government and in elections? Like, for example, how do we have the next election?
I don't know if I should go first on this. I'm feeling a little like Greg, a little helpless and hopeless. So I don't know the answer.
But the point is, public confidence has been undermined intentionally by our leaders and Trump and others, not just Trump. So, okay, Greg, you raised your hand. How do we ever restore any kind of public confidence in governmental institutions? Because that's the big point.
Let me dodge that immediate question to follow.
No, you have to answer. No. Go ahead.
This is a debate. I think we have to realize the strength of the anger and disaffection out in the countryside, out in the Trump voters. And I think that's where we have to look to try to establish some harmony, if it's at all possible, and work in educational ways and economic ways, so that the folks that we see who are out there and so angry and so disaffected and so skeptical and cynical of their government can maybe be mollified a bit, so that we can all get along a little bit better.
We're struggling to find hope. Phil, what do you think?
I don't think all the blame should go on the Republicans and
Right.
the Trump people. Look, for 4 years, the Democrats have led this drive to get him out of office, and that's indelible. So everybody's going to have to back off. But the Democrats are keeping up right now. Lots of them are calling for him to be taken to prison when he gets out of office. And they're all talking not any good for the country. Somebody has to be able to stand up and say, let's do this together. And the only one I know who has a chance of doing that, sort of has a record of doing that, is Biden.
Larry, how do we go forward here?
How about the radical idea of getting rid of the Electoral College, going to a national popular vote, one winner, cumulative number, do it that way.
Well, then do you have the two coasts then rule? You have nobody. I think that's why everybody in the Midwest feels disenfranchised, and that's a big pocket of why Trump's arisen.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's a good idea.
That's fine. But then let's take it down to state levels, where the big city people and the rural people will disagree, but it's still a popular vote.
Okay, so Dan Rather, our good friend and longtime CBS newsman, was fond of asking for closing thoughts. So I'll give everybody 15 seconds. Closing thoughts. Phil Jones.
We're a hell of a mess. We haven't seen anything yet. COVID was involved in this election, and look what we're facing ahead on this whole COVID crisis. And Biden used it to get in, and it could very well end up in his lap, and he has no control of it.
Denise, 15 seconds.
Well, I would like to see, especially the 24-hour news, to do some news and to stop doing as much commentary and discussion and editorializing. I mean, if we all did that when we were working, we'd have been fired.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it. And I see it because I try to watch the network news at night if I'm home, and I've been home a lot. And it happens on that half hour as well. It's incredible to me. And I think that would be a great start.
Gregg?
Well, my wife will tell you that I've been distraught and depressed for the last 4 years. And I frankly am delighted with the turn of events. I don't mean to diminish the problems that Biden faces, but for the first time in 4 years, I've had some hope that perhaps we could get back to normal politically and governmentally, and that the immediate future, the next 4 years will be fraught, but that we can maybe see our way back to an even keel where it just isn't day after day after day of Trump fatigue.
Take us home, Larry.
My thoughts are encapsulated in numbers. How many White House campaign and staff people have come down with COVID? 53. The White House just announced the structure of a tennis pavilion. I'd like to know how many $1,200 stimulus checks it took to build the tennis pavilion. There are now 12 million Americans behind an average of $5,858 in back rent and utilities. Most of them families with children or families of color. We've just had the warmest November in history. And by the time Trump leaves office, he will have signed death warrants for 25% of the inmates on death row.
Okay, so you've just laid out a lot of topics we can get to down the line. And I can also say that you were a longtime producer. If you were on air like Denise and I were, and Phil, they'd have cut you off a long time ago. They give you the old but you make some good points, and I appreciate that.
I'm hurt.
No, don't be. Listen, I think that was fun. Everybody think that was fun?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
A rollicking good time. Anyway, thanks to Larry Doyle and Gregg Ranshaw, Phil Jones, Denise LeClair Cobb. I'm Bob Orr. Thanks to you for watching Roundtable. We'll do it again. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on our Press Club of Southwest Florida page. We'll see you.